following landlord and tenant educational models were developed as a community service in partnership between the City of Hutchinson, the United Way of Reno County, and the Housing and Credit Counseling, Inc. of Topeka, Kansas. A series of 8 educational models were developed and produced by HCCI to identify and address frequently raised landlord and tenant issues in the Hutchinson area. Topics included in the 8 educational models include topic of leases, security deposits, notices, evictions, move-in, move-out inspections, renters' rights, abandonment, and pets, companion animals, and service animals. All information discussed in the landlord-tenant educational models can be referenced in the Kansas Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, or the KRLTA. Leases. Leases lay out the rules for both tenant and the landlord. What is a lease? Well, a lease is a binding legal contract as defined in KSA 582543K and KSA 582545. Who can enter into a lease? Again, under statute KSA 582543 E, F, and G, lease and rental agreements can be entered into between a renter and a landlord, a property owner, a lessor, a sublessor, an organization, a corporation, a government entity, any other commercial or legal entities. What types of leases are there? There are 2 types of leases, verbal and written. The Housing Credit Counseling, Inc. strongly recommends that you enter or get a written lease. Written leases are documentation. The other side of that coin is if you ever have a verbal lease, how would you ever prove any aspect of a verbal lease? Always get it in writing. You need to be able to contact your landlord 24/7. In order to do this in your lease, make sure you have your landlord's phone number, emergency number, business number, cell number, email address. You need all of this information so that you can contact your landlord 24/7. Everyone needs to know what is in your lease. Do you know what is in your lease? Read your lease always before signing. You need to know what are the terms of your lease. Is it a month-to-month lease, a year-to-year, 3 months, 6 months? You need to know how long your lease is. If it is a month-to-month lease, these are the conditions. To prevent lease from renewing at least 30 days before the termination date, written notice must be given by either the landlord or the tenant. To end a month-to-month lease, only requirement is a 30-day notice by either landlord or tenant. If you are in a year-to-year lease, when the above rental term ends, this agreement shall change automatically into a month-to-month tenancy. To prevent lease from renewing at least 30 days before lease termination date, you have to give a written notice to terminate, and it must be given by the landlord or the tenant. You need to know your lease details. Your rent amount. How much rent will I pay? When do I pay it? When is it due? Can I pay by check? Can I pay by money order? Who do I make the rent checks payable to? All this information, again, should be outlined in your lease. In your lease, it will also tell you who pays utilities. In this case, electricity, gas, propane, water, trash. Who is responsible for paying all these utilities? What about rent increases? Written notice of a rent increase or other lease changes must be given to the tenant by the landlord at least 45 days before end of term. In a month-to-month lease, this is before your periodic rent is due. Deposits are also an important part of your lease. Under KSA 582550, security deposits are defined. For an unfurnished apartment, landlords can only get a deposit in the amount of 1 month's rent. For a furnished apartment, landlords can get 1 1/2 the amount of 1 month's rent. What about other deposits, say pet deposits? Under KSA 582550, pet deposit, how much can landlords get for a pet deposit? Under the statute, it says 1/2 of 1 month's rent. That is what landlords can get as a pet deposit, 1/2 of 1 month's rent. In your lease, you also find late fees. What happens if I'm late with my rent? The lease will define what happens. They can charge either a flat rate that says each month, if you don't pay by such and such a day, you have to pay such and such amount, and they leave it at that. Or landlords can say, if you're late on your rent, you are going to have to pay daily a per day late fee, beginning on this day of the month, and it has a maximum of how many days or how much money I will be able to charge you. In your lease, landlords have the right to know who is living in the rental, the names of the renters. They need to know the names of all individuals living in their property. If there is going to be a subleasing agreement, tenants just can't go out and get somebody else to sublease their place. They have to work with their landlord and get consent from the landlord or the landlord's agent. Important part of old buildings, old issues with old buildings is lead and lead-based paint. Both landlord and tenant must sign a lead-based paint disclosure recognizing any known presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards in the rental unit. There has to be a signature of both landlord and tenant declaring their knowledge or understanding of lead-based paint in the rental unit. Can I break my lease? The short answer, no. Proper notice must be given as defined in lease agreement and or Kansas Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. In your lease, it will state under what circumstances you can break your lease or what options are there for breaking your lease. There has to be a mutual consent by tenant and landlord if there is something in writing in your lease. Consequences for breaking the lease. Tenants to be responsible for continuing paying monthly rental payments throughout the term of the lease. You will have to continue paying the monthly payments. The landlord can take you to court under this definition. Another consequence or option for tenants is they can be responsible for finding a new renter. You're leaving the apartment, it's up to you to go find somebody to move in and keep paying the rent. The last option would be, again, is a mutual consent by both landlord and tenant that says it's okay to break your lease. Termination of lease under statute KSA 582570, there are several ways to terminate the lease. Under KSA 582570, the end of lease, 30-day notice to prevent lease from renewing is one way. Under KSA 582559, landlord noncompliance, or the 1430. Under KSA 582564, tenant noncompliance, again the 1430. Under KSA 582564, You have a 3-day notice to evict for non-payment of rent. These are all termination of lease as defined under statute. The only exception to breaking your lease is that of a military exception. Under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, or the SCRA, soldiers and their spouses have the right to terminate a residential lease upon receiving permanent change of station orders. If they get deployed from their current assignment, they have the right to break their lease, and the landlords must return their deposit. That's the only exception, the military exception. To learn more about HCCI and HCCI services, including landlord and tenant information, publications and forms, or if you need to speak to a landlord-tenant counselor, please call 785-234-0217 or go to www.hcci-ks.org.